Okay, so hey, vegan sister, you're back. We may have lost everyone. We may have lost everyone just now, but we'll see what happens. I'm glad you're back. I'm glad you found your way back, vegan sister. So interesting because we're having this little conversation about ideology, and as I said before, you can hear. And is it better? Is it no longer? Is it popping still, or is it no longer popping? Oh, great, great, everyone. All right, so good, good. Um, I'm just gonna let everybody. I don't know if everyone is back. We have about half as many people in the room as we had before. Okay. All right. So Vegan Dilemma, you're back, and I think that I was responding to. I think we were responding to what you were saying, but I hope you understand that what I'm trying to get away from, however, is this focus on identity. There are times when identity becomes an important part of the discourse, but it shouldn't be the discourse. Shouldn't be the discourse. Um, what I said before about, really not like, because sometimes with identity, often what we find is the one thing that we can't agree on. And what I'm saying is that what we should instead spend more of our time doing is focusing on the things that we can agree on. Even if it means that, we might not be looking at the issues that are the most, compelling and the most urgent things for everyone in the room, but we can look at things that are important to everyone in the room, and possibly by working together, by building this sense of community, right, a sense of collaboration around things that we can agree on, we might, you know, at some point, at least I've found, at some point when you're working together, when you're collaborating for positive change with people, sometimes the collaboration becomes the point itself, right? Just the opportunity to come together with others becomes the reason for coming together, right? Just being together becomes the reason for being together. Kind of in the way that we're on this live stream today, right? We're on this live stream today because we enjoy this particular discussion. We enjoy asking the questions that we ask. Like, I don't know, you guys like the way the light bounces off of my head. I don't know what it is, but sometimes doing the practice of doing things creates a pattern of doing that thing to the point where we're doing it just because it's what comes naturally. And I feel like that gets lost in communities. Yes, yes, I'm describing community building. That's what I do. That's my work, right? Um, and, uh, and I found in community building is that you can create alliances between people who, you never thought would be in the same room together. It's very interesting because one of the things that I wanted to talk about today was I believe it's Hurricane. Is it Hurricane Harvey that is over Texas right now? And I just wanted to talk a little bit about disaster because we live in a time where we talk about global warming, we talk about climate change, and understand that there are these effects that it's going to start having on the world, right? And so whether or not Hurricane Harvey is a result of climate change, global warming, whether or not things like Hurricane Sandy or these superstorms that we're starting to see with more regularity, these natural disasters that we might be seeing with more regularity, or we might just be paying attention to them more closely because we're hypersensitive to the effects of the climate. What might be happening with the climate? I don't know. Maybe there's fear in the air. I'm not sure. But the subject of community building is part of that as well. How communities respond to disasters is essential, right? Having a healthy community that can respond to emergencies within that community collectively is essential. It's like really essential. And I say that as someone who was part of a community that was, you know, um, uh, that was affected by a natural disaster by Hurricane Sandy back in 2012. I believe it was 2012, 2011. The time has flown. But that event really knocked a community, off, really knocked a community off its feet. And what was learned very quickly, I mean, first of all, anybody who knows, disaster management knows that the first 72 hours you're on your own. Um, Tom Hall says climate change might just be the existential threat that unites us in common cause. It could very well be. And I think this is part of what I mean. It's like we can spend so much time focusing again on the things that we don't agree on, that we find no common cause, and we have so much common cause. And it may be climate change. It may be when a natural disaster strikes your community. Right now, I think there are 50 counties in there are 50 counties right now in the state of Texas that the Governor Greg Abbott has declared as a state of emergency for, which opens those states up to certain types of aid, right? But 50 counties, and how many towns are in those counties, right? And in each of those towns there are communities of neighbors who do or don't know each other, who have a history of collaboration or don't have a history of collaboration. And I can guarantee you, the communities that have a history of collaboration are the communities that are going to fare much better through this natural disaster. And it's not a question of morality. It's not that because they're better. It's because they know how to work together and they know how to cooperate. And when the power is knocked out and there's no way that emergency services can get to you for the first 72 hours, you only can depend on your neighbors. And so having built-in trust, knowing who's like a good speaker, like knowing who's good at organizing in your community becomes like a key when you suddenly need to get your community organized for, food and shelter and warming stations and charging stations for people's phones because they're cut off from their, relatives that might live outside, right? So this is part of, when we talk about, making a society great, a big part of that comes from people on the ground looking around them at the people around them and saying, who are these people? Do I know them? How can I get to know them? What are the needs that they have that I can help to provide, and what are the needs that I have that the people in this community can help to provide? And sometimes it's just companionship, right? It's just having functions in your community, like a bake sale or something, anything, so that you get to see the people that live around you as other than just those people who walk by who don't say hello to me, so that if things do go wrong, there's the possibility that people will be able to function to help each other out. And it's very complex. People have to get up to speed very quickly. One thing that I thought that I would suggest, I don't know, if you're in the United States and you don't have, if you feel like, I don't know what would happen if there was any kind of a disaster in my community, you can actually, FEMA, and I can't even think, I think it's the Federal Emergency Management Agency, maybe FEMA is that, I'm not sure, but FEMA is the organization that like shows up to help manage disasters when they happen. And FEMA offers free training online. You can get your certification in several areas of emergency management through FEMA. And I would suggest that, like, if you don't know who the certified emergency manager in your neighborhood is, you should become that person, right? You should become the certified emergency management person. And the thing about being trained in emergency management isn't because it makes you smarter than anyone, isn't because it makes you better than anyone. It's possible for you to create the spaces in your community in a disaster, so that when the folks do show up 72 hours later, you already have a command center. You already have a communication center set up. You have a place where people in the neighborhood are going for information. So that doesn't have to suddenly change, right? Because getting information to people becomes really, really challenging, right? To know where the people in your neighborhood who can't get around are. If you know that there's someone in your neighborhood who's in a wheelchair, for example, if there are senior citizens, to know where they live, so that when the emergency management folks show up and say, is there any place that we should go and check, you have a list of those people. And it sounds complicated, but we're not talking about for your city, we're talking about for your little neighborhood. It could be just your block, right? You could just know for your block where the vulnerable people are. So and Trey Legal says, because hey, good morning, Trey, and good morning, love, light, Ananda, good morning. There are folks who've come in that I did not get a chance to say hello to. So I'm going to read some of the things you said. Have you seen Al Gore's movie, An Inconvenient Sequel? I have not yet, and I will check it out. Vegan Dilemma says, I take a more cynical view on Tom's statement. Climate change will further divide the haves and haves not. That's a possibility, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have, especially when we think of what does it mean to have, a whole other conversation. There might even be an entire video in that. So thanks for putting that idea forth, Vegan Dilemma. Winter Wolves, yeah, it's quite possible. But again, how do we measure? What does it mean to have? Because having community, having access to resources, or having money and a whole bunch of stuff that you went down to the mall and bought, right? You know what I mean? I think what we think about as have needs to maybe shift a little bit in our, but again, that's another. Trey Legal says, I'm from Houston, and although Houston wasn't hit too hard by Harvey, I was extremely concerned. Yeah, so like that's a thing that you could do. Is like you could go to the FEMA training website. I'm putting it right here in the chat. You can go to the FEMA training, webbing trained in emergency management, and some of it is just knowing like who the role players in an emergency management situation are, because there are particular roles, there are particular categories that things will be broken into, and if you know those things in your community, you can say, okay, they're going to send somebody who's going to be in this role. We need somebody now in our neighborhood who's going to take on that role, even if it's just to you don't know what you're doing, even if it's like to take the phone calls or to send out the email blast if people have power, or to know someplace where you can get information printed and copied, and who are the volunteers who are going to distribute that information. These are all things that we had to figure out on our feet for a neighborhood of about 12,000 people, right? Which isn't that many people if you think about it. It's not that many people. It's a lot of people, but it's not so many that it's not manageable, right? It's not so much you can't print out, you can't get copies printed out. 11,000, it's not 11,000 families, it's 11,000 people, right? Hey, Mike on Raw. So yeah, hey, the Kissed Vegan, welcome, good morning. So yeah, so talking just a little bit about this idea of what it means to be emergency prepared, and how that part of emergency preparedness simply having a practice. All right, I'm not going to forget that, Trey Legal. And I also got, by the way, just so you know that I am following, I got the link that you sent me to some things that, in fact, you said, here are the posts he made about on his blog, and I'm going to go and look at those things. I'm not sure what it's in reference to, but I will be doing. It's not like the mic. It's not the microphone is just on the camera. I'm not sure if it's my bandwidth or something like that. But yeah, please do let me know if you have any issues here. Winter block populated with full 15-story apartment buildings. That sounds daunting. See, yeah, in a case where it's like multiple 15-story apartment buildings, it just might be your building, or it just might be your floor, right? It just might be your floor. But you do what you can, right? You do what you do what you can. So it's interesting to me because when we in New York City, my experience of New York is I didn't know anybody I didn't know any of my neighbors, right? There was a time when I didn't know any of my neighbors. And then I started, just getting to know the person across the hall, right? But I think it's not. I don't think that it's ever. It's not any one person's responsibility to know everything, right? But if you're not organized in your building, you probably need a person to be organized in your building, right? And I don't know if there are meetings that happen in your building, like a tenant meeting that happens regularly. That sometimes happens in certain buildings. I know that like condos have condos, and co-ops have co-op associations and things attached to their buildings. So there should be a channel for the people who you are closest to be able to communicate with each other in the case of an emergency. I mean, clearly the concentration of people in metropolitan areas is a huge challenge, but you're probably not the first person who's thought about it. And if you check with your local office of emergency management, I believe in New York City it's just the cost of emergency management. Um, you can learn if there are um, ways to plug into. It might be somebody who's already like going to regular workshops and things at the office of emergency management, like in your building or somebody in your neighborhood. It's not an easy thing, but it's a practice that's necessary, as I said before, of building it's the of emergency. It doesn't have to be directly about emergency preparedness. It's just having those links with the people around you so that you have a network of support, a group of people who are used to working with each other and won't be tentative about having to work with each other. Um, Miguel Angelo, and hello, Miguel Angelo. The true pursuit of social justice that is balanced between equity and mutual respect depends on what all we can deliver for that noble cause. That's really interesting because that's another thing. Thank you for that. And then Trey Legal said, I think it's a great catalyst to get to know your community as well. Yes, and which is really interesting. I mean, as our population boom, the last thing it seems is that we want to be alienated from each other, but that seems to be something that is happening, at least in the United States. In fact, the project that the project that they're working on the North End, and there are video. I have a video about it. Something called the American Riyadh Project was started to address the issue of the isolation that we have, just the lack of rituals that we have in our society about coming together. Maybe it used to be church, but now churches are mega churches, so you don't even know the people that you might be going to. You may never see if people travel from 10 miles away to go to church together. I don't think many, if any, people will have aversion if you're trying to organize in case of a natural disaster. You'd be surprised at what happens, because you have to remember, in a natural disaster, the people who are the victims are, first of all, they're possibly devastated. They may have lost everything, and their main concern may be just themselves. People may find themselves shutting down, and they might either just like, okay, I'm going to take my I'm going to just I'm going to, I know I have friends who are somewhere else, I just go, right, which is reasonable. So you would be surprised at how difficult it is to organize people who are in that moment most concerned with themselves, right? Yeah, it can be especially when it feels like order has broken down. People don't feel safe. People may not want to come out of their houses, but they may need to come out of their houses to get access to information that's vital. So yeah, it's not that people are bad. It's just that people are in shock, and there's a lot of things going on, and people don't know what to do. But if there are people that are trusted, those are the people who can like gather people together in the community and just say, hey, is everybody okay? Can we do some needs assessment? Can we find out what's broken? Is everybody here? just knowing who's around, right? If when one of the issues in Red Hook is when the FEMA folks were going through the projects, for example, through public housing buildings, they were knocking on the door, and as far as anybody was concerned, they sounded like, they could have been the police. People were nervous about like people knocking on the door and then pushing into their apartments to rob them. So not having, these connections led to, people not getting the access to the services that they needed, especially people who felt like they couldn't get out of their apartments, mostly senior citizens, people who had mobility issues. So yeah, and like who's going to go and carry food to all of the people who are, caught in their houses when they're worried about when their electricity is going to come back on. So it can be challenging. In my experience, I found that it was challenging in my experience. Um, Seems people now prefer to choose those they communicate online rather than to expend the effort to now to know those chance placed near them, the chance placed them near to. Yeah, Michael and Raw, I agree with you. There are people who have closer relationships with people in other countries through social media than people might not know their next door neighbor, which is, I think you guys, some of you may have seen, I did a brief series, I think of 6 videos that were like community organizing for beginners. And one of the things it talked about was just get to know your neighbor. If nothing else, know the people on your street. That can be so vital. But there is always the risk that in spite of such honorable desires for justice, they are misused by corrupt and opportunistic men who see the chance. I'm not sure. Okay, wait a minute. People are very cynical of each other. I hear all the time, I don't like people. And I'm like, what do you mean? It's sad. Yeah. There are certain people on, there are certain YouTube content creators that we follow that are followed by lots and lots of people whose main message is, I don't care about people. It might be because they care about something else, but it seems to be in the fashion. Misanthropy seems to be fashionable. I'm not sure, Michelangelo. I need some clarification. There's always the risk that in spite of such honorable desires for justice, they are misused by corrupt and opportunistic men who see the chance. And I think by opportunistic men, you mean people. I need to know a little bit more what you mean. Do you mean when people organize, and so that those community mechanisms exist, those practices of collaboration can be taken advantage of, or the lack of those mechanisms can lead to, like, because then there's a void, right? If you're not organized, there's a void. If your community is not organized, then that means that there's space for somebody to step into the role of organizer, and then they can organize that community to do whatever it is that they want, right? Under the guise of safety or what have you, community well-being. I see that Swag Vegan is here, but I'm not seeing you in the chat, so I'm going to say, good morning, Swag Vegan. It's been a little while. Okay, and then Trey Legal says, oh, okay, I was more so talking about if we're organized before the disaster, but those are good points. Oh, okay, all right, yes, if a community is organized before a disaster, yes, the likelihood is that they're going to be able to organize in the disaster, right? Because it's something that has to be a practice, like, self-defense. You don't go and take one self-defense class and then expect it to work if you get attacked, right? You have to have a practice. You have to have a practice of it, so that it becomes second nature. And I think the same thing is true with organizing communities. There has to be some kind of practice, low stakes practice, where people come together just for the sake of coming together. And then those things become automatic during a disaster. So possible. And then Trey Legal, yes. So a question. Well, I speak from my own experience as it is what happened in my country, Venezuela. I think Angelo, I think that this is the perfect opportunity for for you to guest. I would really love to, if you were comfortable with that, for you to come on and talk about that experience. It seems like we're looking at emergency preparedness as the main theme of the video. And so anybody who would want to talk about that or any other issues that come to mind, I'd be happy to have you um, jump on and guest. Miguel Angelo, if you want to talk a little bit about Venezuela, that would be awesome. I'd love to hear your thoughts on there. Like vegans, yeah. Hey, I hope you're yes, and I hope you're well too. Okay, surrounded by gun-toting Trump, Trumpinistas, go to the range and practice to the torso and one to the head on communist silts. Yeah, I guess it's a little bit disturbing. I wonder what that is. I've heard a few people talking about communism, like for some reason, like is that we're saying that people are communists? Does anybody even care about that anymore? But I'm starting to see a pattern of accusations of commune coming back. Like what is this? The 1950s? Miguel Angelo says, my philosophy of life is this: to find the truth, you must always scrutinize. I'm 100% pro-life and 100% pacifist. I'm agnostic and nonpartisan. I appreciate that. I appreciate that as a position. I'm starting to interrogate for myself, because I am also someone who really embraces nonviolence. I'm starting to interrogate for myself the judgment placed on others for their of others that might be considered violent. It's when it comes to like property damage, because I feel like life is more important than property. So if like something gets broken to save thousands of lives, I don't know. But also considering that sometimes violence is self-defense, and you're not aware, if we're not aware enough of the circumstances that people are in and the threat that they feel, to judge them in any way for feeling like they need to kick back when like the thing is descending on them, if they feel like they need to kick back. But that's a whole other story. But yeah, I could a place to be in. I find myself less and less even wanting to talk about like parties. When people tell me what their political affiliations are, I'm like, that doesn't mean anything to me, because I've been in conversations with people who are, extremely liberal, who have said things to me that I have found, first of all, very conservative, and second of all, racist or homophobic, right? And these are folks who consider themselves, you know, Democrats. Like, being a Democrat not make you liberal. You can be a Democrat, and you can be very conservative, and you have a lot of people around you. You can live your life selfishly, right? You could be a horrible person. So I'm considering those lists as informative. Good thing about the person. So I'm certainly down with this idea of being nonpartisan. Winter Wolf says pro-life, so asking Michelangelo, pro-life as an anti-abortion in all cases. And I wonder about that too, because people say pro-life, and I hate the fact that you have to be anti-pro-life, or one might even consider this idea of being anti-pro-life to be pro-choice. I think you can be both, but I don't know if that's what you mean, Michelangelo. It seems like Winter Wolves wants to know. So again, it might be nice to have you, talk about these things. So yeah, I see. I'm late. I'm just running off at the mouth, y'all, to get in the guest queue. But again, no pressure on anyone. There, you guys are great. So there. So we've talked a little bit of the thing that I've been talking about in the last week. I made a lot of videos last week, y'all. So I don't know. I hope y'all appreciate it. If you haven't been checking in on the YouTube channel, I made a lot of videos last week. I think I made 3 videos, which is good, which is a good week. I may have actually made 4. I'm not sure. Um, uh, but there's been subject matter. There's been some pushing things that I planned to make videos about out of the way. Um, we're doubling down in Afghanistan, which is really, really, sad to me because it seems like that war will never end. But it seems like, I'm sure it seemed like slavery was never going to end. I'm sure it seemed like that same-sex couples were never going to be able to get married. I don't know. So I don't know what any of this means. Um, Trey Legal says, violence versus nonviolence, something I'm internally struggling with, and can we have change without violence? I see what's interesting. What I think, Trey Legal, is that I think the systematic change we need to be able to interact without violence. We need to find ways to do that. And to imagine that we could have a world that wasn't at war. When you look at some of the aggression that's going on in the world today, I'm certain some of it is just necessary. Like, it's not justifiable to me. Say, oh, it's because this leader wants to do that, and this one is these, and the other one this or that. You know, uh, you know. Why is that accompanied by like a war, right? Aren't there ways that the entire world can respond to case? And it could be through sanctioning, it could be through whatever, but because again, we don't collaborate as men, so we can't work together to put pressure on someone to do the right thing. I don't sense, right? Maybe I'm idealistic. It's a change that is necessary. We have to learn how to engage because we're always responding to the past, responding to things that have happened, a history of violence, history of imperialism. Live in this today, responding through the past, and it seems like the need way to respond is like, let me get them before they get me, and where it really is that someone does have to be the first one. No more. Um, but what does that mean? What does that look like? And does it mean that person becomes irrelevant because they're not engaging according to the dominant cultural mode? Um, Tom Hall's okay. Winter Wolves, and reading so much about that very thing. Love to hear some of the titles. Winter Wolves. Tom Hall says, I struggle with that power myself. Power without a demand, and violence seems to get the attention. Angela says, of course, if you have the example of Gandhi, who achieved freedom and independence of India, from a powerful empire full of violence, um, those are great examples. But even about Gandhi, my sense is that even that struggle, there may have been destructive elements. I don't know. I don't. Um, like, when were people willing to at least struggle? And I'm saying by struggle meaning they didn't just lie down and die. Um, yeah, Miguel Angeles. Yeah, I mean, like how, um, looking at what we can the success of India. You know, I think we also should look at like what were the other forces. Was it that um, maintaining occupation in India was no longer, you know, cost effective? Like, what else was in play? You know, tremendous resources. So what are the other success of India in achieving their independence. So that's something that I would want to look at before getting into a discussion about it. But I think it's important, and it is what's held as an example in the same way that King is held up as an example of a nonviolent struggle. But although Martin Luther King was, a leader, a figurehead in a nonviolent struggle, there were violent struggles that were taking place in the United States for civil rights. There were violent struggles that were taking place in tandem with those. And I don't know what ultimately led to the passing of the Civil Rights Act. Was it Martin Luther King and his nonviolent struggle, or was it, rebellions that were held in 150 some odd cities across the United States that made, the government have to reconsider the way that we're being treated in this country? You hear often about the 160 cities that rebelled, in what they called, I think it was in the summer of 1967. It may have all been that. I think it was called the Long Hot Summer or something like that. But look it up, research that. There were a lot of violent struggles that were included, that were part of the struggle for civil rights. But what we hear is Martin Luther King. That's the dominant narrative. But that's not the whole picture. And so my time that Gandhi was, leading a nonviolent struggle, were there violent struggles that were happening at the same time that weren't publicized, but made it less viable for the British to maintain their rule in India? It is like for USA won the war in Afghanistan and Iraq, but lost peace in those territories. Yeah, this is the first time that I'm hearing about this. Did we win the war in Afghanistan? We're still there. I don't know. It seems to me like what follows winning the war is peace, right? So if we're not at them, there's still troops that they're in fact increasing the number of troops. So I don't know if we've won. Why are we still there? And we're not just maintaining. We're not just maintaining law and order. Mel says many don't want to push the whole picture because it's not picturesque. No, it's not. It's not. Which is why history becomes so important. It becomes so important to know your history and not just to rattle off these names and dates thinking that you're not connected for us historically. Things happen in isolation in history, the way we're taught history. It comes in, compartments. The war, the First War, the Second War, the Cold War, right? Usually around violence. We usually organize our history around violent struggles, right? And it's usually the victor who's writing the story, right? What I mean is be imposed using brute force. I agree with that. What can brute force can be successful in repressing a society, and in some ways we live in a society that is I don't know necessarily that that's the full picture either. I think that there are a lot of people who are decent people, just decent people, but there are many threats in those who might step out of line in the United States, at least. So, how do we really rethink the way that we organize our society around the idea that people are good, organizing our society around the idea that people are bad? I don't know. I don't know, y'all. I've enjoyed this discussion. Tom Hall says civil unrest was a storm around Gandhi. He was the calm eye of that storm for Dr. King. So Tom Hall is pointing out the fact that there was happening in India as part of the struggle for independence. So, yes, y'all. I know we have about 2 minutes left, but we're either going to go in on some more stuff or we're going to just sit there um, and give everyone the opportunity. And we'll pick them up again. Obviously, next week we can continue. I'll be moving it forward a little bit in next week. I've been promising to make a video about. I just have a rant about Steve Bannon. It might be out now. It might be pointless, but I have a little bit of a Steve Bannon rant, just because I'm a little bit afraid of what's happening in this whole like movement towards freedom of speech. Like we're talking about speech, but we are having our media is being silenced. The media is being silenced, and in part it's on an ideological level. We're being told it is so corrupt that they're not worth another strategy in maintaining the ignorance of the population, keeping people ignorant. Yeah, so I want to talk about that. So we have Steve Bannon now, who is going to be the knight of the right, and he's going to finally do battle with the fake news. So we're going to see what that does. For the live stream this morning is 12 o'clock, so good afternoon all to you. For those of you who are going to be watching this on YouTube, please like it. If you like it, share, comment, subscribe. This is Reg signing off. Love yourselves.